All right, 101. Let's review our core concepts so you can continue taking your notes. And here we're really going to stress that second one, seeing the relationship between current events, especially World War II, with the art practice in the United States. And I'll be a nice short one to kind of talk about that. But keep an eye out for the introduction of that first core concept right toward the end of this little presentation. So we're talking about Thomas Hart Benton not too long ago, and just wanted to show you that he made one of his most famous paintings about Hollywood in 1937. And it's important to understand the timing. Here, of course, he's depicting Hollywood and all its glamour and grandeur with stuff going on in front of the camera and behind the scenes. Again, this very sort of Americana, very today, this is what the world, the United States looks like. A couple years before that, it's important to understand that Italy invaded Ethiopia. And that very same year, in 1937, Japan invaded China. And many people argue that these two events are the literal start of World War II. Of course, in 1938, very soon after that, Nazi Germany annexed Czechoslovakia. And of course, by 1941, we all know what happened here. And that's when we see some sort of change happen in our culture and, of course, reflected ultimately in our art market. Now, I'd be remiss before I go on to not talk a little bit about probably the other most famous American painter of the time, Edward Hopper, who did this famous painting in 1942. And it was actually released in 1942, so he was actually probably working on this previous to the onset of World War II. And in many ways, it may be the last great American painting of the pre-war period. Very similar if you think about it in terms of Benton's work, right, where we see this sort of scene from American life that seems to have a powerful sort of narrative and emotive content. So here we are at the early days of World War II, and of course we know by 1945 we've seen our invasion of Iwo Jima, which really marked kind of the end of World War II. But of course the official end of World War II happens with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and this is a picture of the Hiroshima atomic bombing in Japan, August 8th of 1945, if I remember correctly. This event has a very strange kind of dual effect on American society, right? One, there's a celebratory aspect of it, right? That we've harnessed this brand new, incredible technology to end this horrible war that, as we really saw, really went on for a decade previously, if you go all the way back to 1935 and Italy's invasion of Ethiopia. And of course, there was another side to it, right? This sort of reflection about the events of the war itself and of the end of the war. And I think a painter that we've already been introduced to, Barnett Newman, says this at this moment. He says, after the monstrosity of the war, what do we do? What is there to paint? He says we have to start all over again. And so we go from Nighthawks in 1942 to something that Barnett Newman paints, and it looks something like this. Definitely a different kind of painting, of course. Newman talks a little bit more about it too. He says, I believe that here in America, some of us, free from the weight of European culture, are finding the answer by completely denying that art has any concern with the problem of beauty or where to find it. Let's go back to that, right? Free from the weight of European culture. Remember, the first prominent American painters of the 19th century, including Singer Sargent and Whistler, had to go to Europe because that's where the culture of art was at the time, right? So rather than sort of looking toward Europe and actually going there to be a great artist, by 1945, Barnett Newman's saying, let's forget European culture, right? Let's ignore that. We're freeing ourselves from the impediments of memory, association, nostalgia, legend, myth, or what have you, that have been the devices of Western European painting, okay? Think about Edward Hopper's painting and think about Thomas Hart Benton's painting, right? Were they nothing if not memory, association, nostalgia, legend, if you think about it in terms of American myth, American, right? So they're looking specifically, they're saying that, look, that's the European influence. The European influence gave us two horrible world wars. Only our American forthrightness and stick-to-itiveness and technological mastery ended those things. So let's stop doing what the Europeans are doing as artists, and let's figure out our own thing. Jackson Pollock actually reflects this idea in a statement that he makes. He says, new needs new techniques. And the modern artists have found new ways and new means for making their statements. The modern painter cannot express this age, the airplane, the atom bomb, the radio, in the old forms of Renaissance or any other past culture. So that's why the change happens, right? One of the reasons, but one of the prominent reasons is that the artists, partly because of World War II and other things that are happening in the United States, they say, let's stop looking to the past and back to Europe and back to the old-timey days for what art is and how to make it, right? Let's invent a new thing.